The rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers clearing freezing rain from the safety glass was the only sound inside the cab of my F-250. It was 2,300 hours. On a Tuesday night, the ambient exterior temperature hovered a fraction of a degree above freezing, turning the downpour into a slick layer of icy slush on the asphalt. My name is Cameron Nelson. I am 29 years old, and I'm a master carpenter and timber framer. I do not wear tailored suits. I do not attend networking mixers, and I do not negotiate corporate mergers. I wear flame-resistant canvas work jackets dusted with cedar sawdust. I measure shear strength. I calculate load-bearing physics, and I swing a 22-ounce framing hammer to ensure that wooden structures do not buckle and collapse under pressure. I am a functional component of the city's blue-collar labor force. I was currently gripping the steering wheel, navigating the poorly lit suburban roads because my younger sister, Clara, had called me 30 minutes prior in a state of frantic panic. Clara is a junior assistant event coordinator. Her 10-year-old sedan had just suffered a transmission failure on the outer loop of the highway, stranding her and her executive boss on the muddy shoulder after a grueling 14-hour site inspection. I checked my side mirrors, activated my turn signal, and pulled the truck onto the uneven gravel directly behind Clara's dead sedan. The hazard lights were flashing weakly in the downpour. I threw the truck into park, leaving the diesel engine idling to maintain the interior heat. Clara sprinted through the freezing rain, her boots splashing in the deep puddles. She yanked open the passenger door of my truck, scrambling up into the warm cab. She was soaked, shivering in a thin autumn jacket. "Cameron, you are a lifesaver," Clara gasped, wiping wet hair out of her eyes. "The tow truck dispatcher said it would be 3 hours. We are freezing out here." She didn't wait for my response. She turned back toward the open door, facing the dark sedan, and waved into the storm. A second woman emerged from the passenger side of the broken car and walked steadily through the driving rain. She did not sprint. She did not hunch her shoulders against the cold. Even in the miserable downpour, she moved with a measured, deliberate grace. She climbed up into the cab of the truck, taking the middle seat directly next to Clara, bringing the sharp scent of cold rain and faint vanilla into the enclosed space. Audrey Wright was 36 years old. She was the lead executive director for Vanguard Events, a firm specializing in high-profile charity galas. She wore a tailored black trench coat that was currently being ruined by the weather, and her dark hair was plastered against her pale cheeks. She looked profoundly exhausted, carrying an invisible weight that clearly had nothing to do with the mechanical failure of the car. "Mr. Nelson," Audrey said, her voice smooth but tight with the cold. "I apologize for the inconvenience this has caused you. Clara insisted you wouldn't mind coming out this far." "It is not an inconvenience," I replied plainly, my voice a rough gravel that lacked any social polish. I reached over to the center console and turned the analog heater dial to maximum output. "I have chains in the toolbox, but a drop transmission requires a flatbed tow. Give me your residential address. I will drive you home safely." I merged the truck back onto the highway and dropped Clara off at her apartment complex first. She talked rapidly the entire way, filling the cab with nervous energy regarding the logistics of an upcoming charity gala. Audrey remained silent beside her, staring blankly out the rain-streaked passenger window, her posture rigidly controlled. After Clara thanked me and exited the vehicle, I pulled back onto the road. The silence in the cab became distinct and absolute. I am not a man who initiates effortless small talk to fill quiet spaces. I kept my eyes focused on the slick asphalt, monitoring the braking distance of the vehicles ahead. 20 minutes later, navigating through a manicured suburb, I noticed the streetlights were entirely dark. Blocks of houses were plunged into blackness. Localized grid failure. I observed aloud, tapping the brake pedal. The ice accumulation likely brought down a secondary distribution line. I pulled up to the quiet curb outside Audrey's gated townhouse complex. I depressed the brake pedal and shifted the column shifter into park. Audrey looked out the passenger window at her house. The exterior security lights were dead. She let out a sharp, sudden gasp. I shifted my gaze to follow her line of sight. The storm had caused a large branch from the ancient oak tree in her front yard to snap under the weight of the ice. The timber had crashed directly through her floor-to-ceiling front bay window. The structural envelope of her home was shattered. Shards of thick glass littered the concrete porch, and the freezing rain was pouring unhindered into her dark living room. "Oh my God," Audrey whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the damage. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I reached behind my seat and grabbed my high-lumen tactical flashlight. Stay in the cab until I verify the structural integrity of the ceiling joists, I instructed, my voice dropping into a flat, operational register. I stepped out into the freezing rain. I walked up the concrete path, my boots crunching over broken glass. I swept the bright beam of my flashlight over the damage. The branch had destroyed the primary window frame, but the heavy header beam above the glass had held the load. The roof was not going to collapse. However, the ambient temperature inside the house was rapidly equalizing with the storm outside. The hardwood floors were soaking in a puddle of icy water. Audrey did not listen to my command. She climbed out of the truck and walked up the path, wrapping her wet trench coat tighter around her shivering frame. She stood next to me, staring at the ruined interior of her home. The wind howled, blowing freezing rain through the gaping hole and onto her face. She bit her lip and said it was a bad idea. "Cameron, no. Please," she argued weakly, her teeth beginning to chatter. Her voice was thin and defensive, overwhelmed by the sudden chaos. "You've already driven 40 miles out of your way. I'll just call an emergency glass repair company. I'll wait in the kitchen. You need to go home. I don't want to be a burden on your schedule. It's a bad idea for you to stay out here in this weather." I stopped inspecting the shattered window frame. I turned slowly to face her. "I do not abandon people standing in freezing rain." I said, "I can't sleep like this." My voice was a low, steady rumble that cut through her panicked protests. Leaving a biological system in a critical failure mode violates my baseline protocols. You cannot safely achieve restorative sleep in a freezing, wet environment. You will suffer hypothermia. I am a master carpenter. Securing structural perimeters is my designated function. You are freezing. I am going to fix it. I looked down at her hands, which were clutched tightly against the lapel of her coat in an attempt to retain body heat. Then I noticed the ring mark on her finger. The beam of my flashlight caught her left hand. It was a distinct, pale band on her fourth finger, a recent physical subtraction. The skin had not yet tanned to match the rest of her hand, leaving a stark white indentation. The logic clicked into place. The fierce independence, the flat refusal to accept basic mechanical help, the anxious biting of her lip. She wasn't just cold, she was actively guarding a newly broken emotional foundation. She was terrified of relying on anyone else because the last structural support in her life had critically failed her. I looked away from her hand. I did not mention the ring mark. I focused purely on physical reality. "Go back to the truck and turn the heater on," I commanded softly, pointing toward the idling F-250. "I'm going to seal this breach." I didn't wait for her to formulate another defensive rejection. I walked back to my truck. "I maintain a dedicated winter storm shoring kit in my tool bed from November through March," I explained over the sound of the rain. "It is a practical necessity in this climate." I unlocked the steel tool bed. I retrieved my circular saw, my tool belt, a box of 3-inch exterior wood screws, and 2 sheets of 1/2-inch CDX structural plywood. I also grabbed a roll of 6mm industrial poly sheeting. I carried the materials to the porch. I worked with methodical efficiency. I utilized my framing hammer to cleanly knock out the remaining shards of jagged glass from the window frame. I measured the opening by eye, engaged the circular saw, and cut the plywood down to the exact millimeter on the wet grass. I lifted the wood panels, pressed them firmly against the exterior window frame, and drove the screws directly into the solid wood studs using my impact driver. The mechanical rat-a-tat of the driver echoed sharply into the stormy night. Once the plywood was structurally secured, I unrolled the poly sheeting over the wood, overlapping the edges, and stapled it tightly to the exterior brick molding to create a flawless, waterproof vapor barrier. Within 45 minutes, the hole in her house was completely sealed. The freezing wind stopped howling through the living room. I walked back to my truck. Audrey was sitting in the passenger seat, the heat blasting, watching me work through the windshield. She was checking the calendar on her phone, a residual habit of a mind that couldn't stop working, before turning the screen off again. I opened the driver's side door and reached behind the seat. I didn't pull out the dangerous propane heater I used for open-air sites. I pulled out a heavy, indoor-safe, electric space heater. "The structural envelope is temporarily secured," I announced, wiping the freezing rain from my eyes. "I'm going to run an extension cord through the foam-sealed gap in the poly sheeting and plug this heater directly into my truck's 2000-watt inverter. It will raise the core ambient temperature of your living room safely. You will be warm." Audrey stared at me. She studied the wet canvas of my work jacket, the sawdust clinging to my sleeves, and the lack of expectation in my posture. "You just built a wall," she whispered, her dark eyes focused on my face. "In the middle of an ice storm. For a stranger." "I am exceptionally good at building walls," I promised, offering a faint shrug. "And you are not a stranger. You are Clara's boss. Go inside, Audrey. Lock your deadbolt." "Where are you going?" she asked. "I'm going to sleep in the cab of my truck," I replied simply. "The diesel engine will idle. The inverter will sustain the heater. I will monitor the voltage load from the cab to ensure it doesn't trip." I shut the truck door before she could argue. I watched her walk safely into her dry, warming house. I reclined the driver's seat, pulled my coat over my chest, and listened to the steady hum of the diesel engine. It was not a grand romantic gesture. It was simply the correct procedure. The next evening, Wednesday at 1,800 hours, the operational environment shifted dramatically. I arrived at the Grand Horizon event hall for a formal site survey. Clara had sent me the official vendor contract that morning. The building was a sprawling, aging architectural monolith from the 1920s. It featured vaulted plaster ceilings, tarnished brass chandeliers, and an outdated structural layout. The main ballroom was a chaotic hive of preliminary activity. Caterers were setting up prep tables, and lighting crews were pulling cables. I walked through the double doors, wearing my thick leather tool belt and a high-visibility work shirt. I carried a specialized laser level and a roll of blueprints. Audrey was standing near the center of the chaotic room, holding a digital tablet, directing a crew of florists with precise, calm commands. The exhaustion from the previous night was hidden beneath a sharp, professional armor. She saw me enter the room and walked over immediately, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "You're exactly on time," she noted, her tone purely professional, bypassing our quiet moment in the freezing storm. "Timeliness is a basic metric of the trade," I replied, setting my tools down onto the floor. I reviewed the structural schematics Clara sent. "The required load capacity for your custom fashion runway and the central display stage is immense. Where is the primary staging footprint located?" Audrey pointed her pen toward the open space at the rear of the ballroom. The venue management stated we need to build a 4-foot elevated wooden platform spanning 60 feet. It needs to safely support the dynamic weight of 200 people, grand pianos, and ice sculptures. My original staging carpenter defaulted on the contract this morning. I need someone who actually shows up and builds things that don't break. I show up. And my structures do not break, I confirmed, pulling the rolled blueprints from my belt. Before I could unroll the paper to begin my inspection, a man stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains near the exit. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He moved with a slick, predatory confidence. Audrey stiffened instantly. Her spine snapped completely rigid. The color drained from her face. Her knuckles turned white as her hands clenched tightly around the edges of her tablet. The confident executive vanished, replaced by the woman shivering in the dark. "Marcus," she said, her voice dropping into a harsh, defensive register. "Audrey, darling," Marcus Vance smiled smoothly, calling her by a patronizing nickname. He ignored my presence, treating me like a piece of the venue's furniture. He reached out and slowly, intentionally traced his index finger along the top edge of her digital tablet, then tapped the screen, causing it to wake up. It was a calculated physical invasion of her workspace, designed to assert dominance. "You shouldn't be here," Audrey stated, pulling the tablet back against her chest, holding her ground, though I could clearly see the tremor in her fingers. "I bought the controlling financial interest in this building last month," Audrey, Vance corrected, a condescending edge bleeding into his tone. "I am the owner. I can be wherever I please. I heard your primary staging vendor pulled out. That's a logistical failure on your part. It would be a tragedy if this charity gala fell apart and ruined your independent firm's reputation." He stepped a fraction of an inch closer, invading her personal space. "You don't have to struggle out here on your own like this," Vance murmured, his voice adopting a sickeningly sweet, manipulative tone. "Cancel the event. Break the contract. Come back to the firm. Come back to me. I can make all of this operational stress disappear. You just have to admit you need my resources." The pale ring mark on Audrey's left hand made complete sense. Vance was the ex-fiance, and he was actively weaponizing his newly acquired ownership of the venue to force a professional failure, attempting to extort her back into a toxic relationship through logistical pressure. I do not involve myself in civilian emotional drama, but I do not tolerate predatory behavior in my operational zone. I stepped smoothly, and decisively between Audrey and Vance. I did not shout. I did not puff out my chest. I utilized my physical size and my rigid canvas work clothes to establish an immediate, unyielding physical boundary. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a flat, deadpan rumble that forced Vance to step back or physically collide with my chest. "I require clear, unobstructed access to the staging footprint to shoot my laser lines." Vance glared up at me, his arrogant smile vanishing. He looked at my worn tool belt, my framing hammer, and my dusty work boots with overt disdain. "I am the formally contracted master carpenter for this event," I replied, maintaining unwavering eye contact. I did not blink. "You are currently standing directly in my required path of travel." Vance's jaw tightened visibly. He looked past my shoulder at Audrey. "You're hiring random day laborers off the street now? This venue explicitly requires certified union professionals, Audrey. If his staging work isn't fully compliant with strict municipal load-bearing codes, I will personally call the building inspector and shut this entire event down for safety violations. My state-issued contractor license number is stamped in visible lettering on the side of my truck outside," I stated quietly, refusing to engage in a posturing contest. "I will ensure the structural system is entirely compliant. Now, move." Vance sneered, realizing he had lost the immediate physical intimidation angle in front of his ex-fiance. He adjusted his expensive tie, turned sharply on his heel, and walked away, disappearing through the main exit doors into the lobby. The suffocating tension in the room slowly dissipated. Audrey let out a long, shuddering breath, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes to stop the tears of pure frustration. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice fragile. "He bought this building specifically because he knew I had this gala booked here 6 months ago. He's trying to slowly squeeze my logistics until I break and go back to him." I looked at the empty floor space where the stage needed to be built. I looked at the exhaustion lining her face. "He thought you'd bend. He forgot steel springs back," I analyzed plainly, stating the structural facts. Audrey dropped her hands, looking at me with a faint, surprised expression. "You didn't ask me what happened. You didn't ask why we broke up or what he did. The historical data of your relationship is entirely irrelevant to the current mechanical task," I replied, pulling my tape measure from my belt. "He is an active hazard. I am here to build a stage. I will not let him near the construction zone while my team is operating." For the next 2 days, I essentially existed inside the venue. I worked a grueling 12-hour shift at my primary framing job in the city, then drove directly to the Grand Horizon Hall to work until 2 in the morning. I ordered quantities of heavy timber, 2x10s, sheets of 3/4-inch structural plywood, and steel lag bolts. I methodically constructed the elevated platform, meticulously calculating the shear strength of every joint, utilizing cross-bracing to eliminate any lateral sway. The sound of my circular saw and the rhythmic pounding of my framing hammer echoed constantly through the ballroom. Audrey was always there. She managed the frantic caterers, the demanding florists, and the anxious charity board members with a relentless efficiency. Despite the chaos, she always found time to bring me a hot black coffee or a cold bottle of water. She didn't ask me to engage in witty banter. We operated in a comfortable, functional parallel silence, bound by the shared objective of ensuring the event did not fail. On Friday night at 2,300 hours, disaster struck. I was standing on the far side of the ballroom, packing my tools into my canvas bag. Audrey was standing directly on top of the newly finished wooden stage, reviewing a clipboard schedule with her lead sound engineer. Suddenly, a terrifying, loud sound echoed through the empty hall. It was the sharp, violent crack of timber splintering under pressure. A panicked gasp escaped Audrey's lips as the wooden platform beneath her feet visibly shuddered and dropped 2 inches. I immediately dropped my tool bag and sprinted across the ballroom floor. "Do not move," I commanded, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden silence. "The primary load-bearing joist just failed. Do not shift your weight." I hit the edge of the stage and dove underneath the elevated structure, pulling my high-lumen tactical flashlight from my belt pouch. I swept the bright white beam across the complex grid of wooden framing. I found the catastrophic failure immediately. The central 4x6 support beam that carried the primary weight of the center stage was completely fractured, but it hadn't snapped due to an overloaded weight calculation. I crawled closer in the dirt, aiming the focused beam of light directly at the timber. Someone had taken a motorized reciprocating saw and physically cut a deep, jagged notch directly through the center of the wooden beam, severing exactly 80% of the wood fibers. The beam was literally hanging by a thread, groaning under the weight of the decking above. The surrounding floor was covered in a fresh, bright pile of raw sawdust that smelled strongly of pine and metal oil. "What happened?" Audrey asked, her voice trembling from above me. "Did we overload the platform?" "No," I stated, my voice dropping to a harsh, cold gravel. I reached out and touched the cleanly sawed edge of the timber. This was an intentional, physical act of sabotage. I crawled out from under the stage, brushing the dirt from my canvas jacket. Audrey carefully stepped off the platform, her face pale. "Vance," she breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. "He has the master keys to the building." "He cut the supports. He engineered a critical structural failure," I confirmed, my jaw locking tight with anger. "The gala is tomorrow night," Audrey whispered, her voice cracking entirely. She leaned against the edge of the damaged stage, sliding slowly down until she was sitting on the dusty floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The fierce resilience she had maintained all week shattered. "It's over. We can't put 200 people and heavy equipment on a compromised stage. It will collapse and kill someone. We have to cancel the event." He won. He actually won. I looked down at her, sitting in the dirt. I watched the brilliant, capable woman breaking down under the weight of a maliciously engineered failure. I do not possess the poetic vocabulary for complex emotional comfort, but I am a master carpenter, and I know exactly how to safely navigate and rebuild broken structures. "The event is not over," I stated, my voice echoing with certainty in the large room. Audrey looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears in the harsh glare of the venue lights. "Cameron, the main support beam is physically severed. You can't just nail a board to that. Fixing a critical load-bearing failure requires a massive teardown and a completely new municipal safety inspection. No union crew will come out here on a Friday night to rebuild a stage." "You are absolutely correct. I cannot legally splice a severed primary beam without a complete teardown," I told her, stepping firmly into her space, my voice taking on a heavy, commanding authority. "But the structural code has temporary emergency shoring provisions. I am not going to tear down his broken stage. I am going to build a cribbing grid directly underneath the damaged section, lift the stage level with hydraulic jacks, and transfer the weight to the concrete slab. We will have a structural engineer sign off on the repair at first light before anyone gets near it." "What does that mean for tonight?" she argued weakly, shaking her head. "He'll call the building inspector tomorrow morning and have the event shut down for an unsafe structure." "It means I am going to isolate the damaged load," I countered, my voice flat and devoid of fear. "I have two 20-ton hydraulic bottle jacks in my truck. I also have solid 6x6 heavy timber posts. I am going to build a temporary emergency shoring system. It is a legally approved load transfer protocol used in heavy construction." I crouched down in front of her, bringing my eye level down to hers. I did not reach out to touch her. I maintained my respectful distance, allowing the calm logic of the mechanical plan to ground her. "Vance committed a felony by intentionally compromising a commercial structure," I noted. "If he calls the inspector tomorrow, I will show them the clean saw marks on the timber, and I will point the police directly toward his master keys. I will restore the structural integrity. You will host your gala tomorrow night. Do you trust me?" Audrey stared at me. She searched the rigid lines of my face for any sign of hesitation or bravado. She found only the raw, undeniable competence of a man who understood his trade. "I trust you," she whispered, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Then stand up," I instructed gently, handing her the heavy flashlight. "I need you to hold the light under the stage." For the next 4 hours, we existed in a state of intense, hyper-focused synchronization beneath the wooden decking. It was a profoundly intimate form of collaboration, entirely devoid of romance but thick with absolute mutual reliance. I worked with heavy, brutal tools. I hauled the steel hydraulic bottle jacks from my truck bed. I carried in solid 6x6 timber blocks. I methodically built a dense, interlocking square grid of wood directly beneath the sagging stage. I placed the hydraulic jacks on top of the grid and began to slowly, rhythmically pump the steel handles. Audrey crouched beside me the entire time in the dirt and the sawdust. She didn't complain about the cold floor or the cramped space. She held the heavy flashlight perfectly steady, anticipating my specific movements, illuminating the exact quadrant of the structural joint I needed to see before I even asked. She was a flawless operational partner, with loud, terrifying groans of shifting wood, the stage slowly lifted a fraction of an inch at a time. The lethal pressure was entirely removed from Vance's severed beam and safely transferred down my timber columns into the unyielding concrete floor. At 0300 hours on Saturday morning, I stepped back from the completed shoring grid. My arms and shoulders were aching from the sustained physical exertion of wrestling with timber and steel jacks. "The structural transfer is complete," I announced, wiping the sweat and sawdust from my eyes. "Are you sure?" Audrey asked, her voice tense. "I do not make assumptions with load-bearing physics," I replied. "Clear the area." We crawled out from under the stage. I stood up, retrieved my specialized laser level from my bag, and positioned it on a tripod directly beneath the repaired joist. I projected a sharp, bright green beam, perfectly parallel to the underside of the decking. "I'm going to load test the repair," I informed her. I dragged 6 heavy, 70-pound sandbags from the staging area and stacked them directly over the repaired section. The structure didn't move a millimeter. It was as solid as bedrock. I stepped back and checked the laser level against my target grid. 0.0 millimeters of deflection, I read aloud, confirming the data. "The load is entirely transferred. The structure is mechanically sound." The perimeter was secured. The stage was restored. Audrey walked slowly down the stairs toward me. She looked at the perfectly level stage, then looked at my tired face. The sheer, overwhelming relief radiating from her posture was profound. She didn't offer a polite, formal thank you. She closed the physical gap entirely, stepping directly into my guarded personal space. She reached up, wrapped her arms securely around my neck, and buried her face against my dirty, sawdust-covered canvas work jacket, holding onto me with fierce, desperate strength. I froze. My hands hovered awkwardly in the empty air. "You fixed it," she murmured against my chest, her voice warm, the vibration transferring directly into my chest cavity. "You didn't run away. You stayed, and you fixed it." The complex logic of the situation clicked perfectly into place. She wasn't an unpredictable variable. She was a brilliant person who simply needed a solid foundation. I lowered my arms. I wrapped them carefully around her waist, pulling her gently against me, resting my chin on the top of her head. The physical contact felt deeply, fundamentally sound. "The foundation is secure," I whispered, my voice rough. Saturday night, 2,000 hours. The charity gala was a massive, undeniable success. The Grand Horizon Hall looked spectacular. 500 wealthy donors filled the room. The custom stage I had meticulously shored functioned flawlessly under the dynamic weight of the band and the heavy equipment. The daylight engineer had signed off on the temporary shoring without hesitation. I did not wear my work clothes. Clara had aggressively insisted I attend the event. I wore a simple, dark suit I had purchased years ago. I stood near the rear exit doors, holding a glass of sparkling water, gripping the thin glass tightly to ground myself. I quietly observed the room, specifically watching the load capacity of the stage. Vance was not present. I had sent him a highly detailed photograph of the severed support beam, the fresh sawdust, and the distinct, motorized saw marks, accompanied by a simple text message. "The municipal building inspector and the police will receive this image if you breach this perimeter tonight." He did not show up. At 2,200 hours, the formal speeches concluded. The crowd began to migrate toward the dance floor. Audrey broke away from a group of major donors and walked directly toward me. She wore a stunning, deep crimson evening gown. She looked radiant, powerful, and entirely out of my league. "You're standing by the exit," she noted, stopping exactly 2 feet away, her eyes shining with triumph. "I am observing the structural load capacity," I noted smoothly, gesturing slightly toward the stage. "It is holding absolutely steady." "The event raised $2 million, she said, her voice dropping the performative, public tone she had been using with the guests. "It's the most successful gala in the firm's history." "The required parameters were met," I confirmed. She turned to face me, her back to the crowded room. She looked up into my face, her dark eyes studying the rough lines of my jaw. The polished event director persona fractured slightly, revealing the intense exhaustion she had been actively suppressing all night. She stepped a fraction of an inch closer. The physical proximity was overwhelming. I looked down at her hand resting near her side. The pale ring mark on her finger was still faintly visible, but she wasn't hiding it in her coat pocket anymore. I took a slow breath, loosening my tight grip on the water glass. I don't know how to navigate this environment, Audrey, I admitted, my voice a rough, quiet rumble in the loud room, stripping away the stoic armor. I prefer men who are out of their element, she promised, reaching up and lightly, intentionally touching the lapel of my cheap suit jacket. It was a microscopic touch, but it sent a distinct, heavy shock through my system. And I have an invitation I can't explain. What invitation? I asked, my heart hammering a rapid rhythm against my ribs. To stay and help me close down the venue after everyone leaves, she whispered, her eyes locked fiercely onto mine. Just us. I looked at the fierce intelligence and the undeniable strength that defined her. I realized I didn't need to be perfectly smooth or wealthy. I just needed to be exactly who I was. I am exceptionally good at shutting systems down safely, I replied, leaning closer. Good, she breathed, her hand sliding slowly from my lapel to rest lightly against my chest. Then, start with me. Don't leave yet. The end.